fear is universal. Unlike comedy or drama, which is vastly culture-based.
The pages are written in blood. Like real human blood.
It's hard for us to understand how real witches were to religious people. But that's how it was back then. Possession, devils, and witches.
I can't say I believe every bit of proof uncovered when talking about a Sasquatch and Bigfoot. Some things are just too hard to dismiss.
The secrets of everything. For a price.
Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 1966. While digging a grave in Clendenin, two men are startled by a mysterious sound up in the sky as a black creature flies over their heads. They didn't know it at the time, but these two men would become the first to witness the now legendary creature known as the Mothman.
This thing is huge, like 10, 12 feet. It's also said to have wings and red eyes. They say it's bat or moth. Like, the Mothman is not something you would soon forget. It's horrifying.
There are those who believe that the Mothman is a bringer of disaster. Most famously, it was seen flying around the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant shortly before the bridge horrifically collapsed, killing 47 people. Mason County, 2016. While driving along State Highway 2 in Point Pleasant, a man witnesses and photographs what he describes as a winged creature.
I can't unequivocally just write off the Mothman as a simple myth. But I also can't help but think that more likely the Mothman is an owl. Owls get pretty big, and humans have a tendency to exaggerate what we actually see. If you describe an owl, it sounds a lot like the Mothman.
Could it be that the mysterious Mothman could be nothing more than a large owl? But what of its devilish ability to cause or predict disasters?
Most people see the Mothman as the bad guy, but I'm not so sure. It's just as possible that it could be appearing to warn people, not necessarily as the bringer, but more like an early warning system.
This idea that the Mothman could be trying to warn people of pending disasters is almost as common as the creature being a harbinger of death. There are many who believe that the Mothman is actually on the side of good.
There's no actual proof that the Mothman caused the bridge disaster or any other disaster. He appears and could be trying to say, look people, something bad is going to happen here. Stay away. Don't come any closer. Beware, human!
While the exact motivations for the Mothman may remain in debate, one creature's intentions are much easier to decipher. The Shadow People are believed to be the prophets of disastrous events.
Shadow people creep me out. A dark silhouette of a person appearing just within your peripheral vision, then vanishing. It's creepy as hell. There are a huge number of theories on what these things could be. Ghosts, time travelers, beings from another dimension, aliens, it goes on and on. Shadow people could be one or all of these things. Or maybe they could be something even more sinister.
Shadow people are a widely debated concept. The lack of a set-in-stone idea of what a shadow person actually is makes identifying their purpose a true exercise of frustration. While many believe that shadow people are a construct of a tired mind, others contend that their purpose is far more nefarious.
Most of the Shadow Man sightings involve someone waking up and seeing their very own Shadow Man. They could simply be a trick of the mind, waking up from a deep sleep and seeing a dark figure. Probably a classic case of the mind playing tricks on you, or the mind filling in the gaps of the shapes we do see in the dark, creating an almost human-like shape.
Could it be possible that there is more to these living shadows than simply being a trick of the mind? Could there be more than one type of shadow person, and we, as humans, have simply bundled them up? What is known is that shadow people have been reported in the earliest writings of human history, making them one of the oldest supernatural beings in recorded history. While the exact motivations for their appearances are continuously debated, could the sheer number of sightings be proof in itself that they definitely exist?
Medical professionals, nurses, doctors, they see shadow people all the time. They consider them as bad omens. Someone is going to die. These aren't your typical crackpots reporting these beings. When a doctor tells me something, I tend to listen, even if what they're saying seems off the wall. A trick of the mind when you're half asleep doesn't explain the appearance of these things in a hospital by reputable and smart people. We're not talking about 1, 2, 10 sightings. We're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of similar sightings. I can't say what they are, but I do believe there is something out there. 100%.
Victor Surge, the creator of Slender Man, stated in an interview that shadow people were a huge inspiration when creating and designing Slender Man. Without the presence of shadow people, there would be no Slender Man.
I like the theory that shadow people have leaked into our dimension from another. For all anyone knows, some shadow people could be alternate versions of ourselves. Maybe because they can't completely cross over, they appear shadow-like.
Japan, January 31st, 1998. Film director Hideo Nakata releases the modestly budgeted horror film Ringu, and, to the surprise of everyone, the film becomes a mega hit. Soon after, mainstream Hollywood begins its jump on the bandwagon with their version of the film, The Ring. Hollywood begins its J-horror run, remaking movie after movie. But what, in the eyes of so many, makes J-horror so much better than the average scary movie?
Fear is universal. Unlike comedy or drama, which is vastly culture-based.
And this makes J-horror, on the surface, easier to translate. But it's the switch around in the writing that makes J-horror way more interesting and scary.
US movies feel the need to attach logic or morality to their stories. And Japanese horror doesn't always do that.
US movies feel the need to attach logic or morality to their stories. Japanese horror doesn't always have a happy ending.
But just where do J-horror and J-horror ideals come from? What makes it feel so unique in a world of scary stories across all cultures? For the West, the jump scare is traditional in horror films. You scream, you laugh, you move on. Japanese audiences prefer the scary type of film that affects them psychologically, such as Kuchisake Onna.
The slit-mouthed woman is an urban legend from the 1970s, I think. She wears a mask and asks random people if they think she's pretty.
She asks if she's pretty, then removes her mask, showing a horribly slit mouth ear to ear. If you get scared or scream, she attacks with scissors or knives. Even schools at the time were warning kids about this vengeful woman or ghost. This was a big thing for a time. A lot of people were terrified if they happened to see anyone with a mask.
Despite the widespread fear of Kuchisake Onna, there are no confirmed reports of anyone actually being attacked by this spirit. And yet, this story persists. Many believe this legend to be a cautionary tale, be good to people. But others believe the spirit of the slit-mouthed woman can never find peace and will forever be cursed by her own fear and anger. Kuchisake Onna is always found in heavily populated areas, targeting strangers, much the opposite of Hachisakusama, the 8-foot-tall woman. Preying on children, Hachisakusama is a beautiful woman with long black hair, usually wearing a white kimono, to instill trust within the young. The 8-foot-tall woman lures in her victims and snatches them with arms that can grow to impossible lengths. This woman targets lone children who venture too far away and often finds her victims near forests and secluded locations. Variations of this urban legend have made their way into various forms of literature and movies, and the results are always the same: a horrific journey.
Sometimes the 8-foot-tall woman will scare her captured kids for days before killing them. Other times, she curses them by turning them into another version of whatever she is.
The legend of Hachisakusama is often used as a cautionary tale to warn children not to talk to strangers or wander too far from home. In modern times, it is often used to explain the disappearances of children in rural areas and has become a popular part of Japanese folklore. The origins of the 8-foot-tall woman are not clear, but perhaps that adds the mystery needed to keep this urban legend powerfully circulating all this time. Germany, 1945. Adolf Hitler has just committed suicide, and the world releases a collective sigh of relief as World War II finally comes to an end.
Hitler was dead. The Nazis were crushed. The fighting was almost over. But for some people, the concept of a defeated Germany was just beyond belief. We often hear of Hitler's suicide, but he was far from the only one who couldn't handle the truth. For so many people, Hitler was the savior, the chosen one, not just for Germany, but for the whole world. Essentially, Hitler was the promised Messiah.
While many pondered the idea of a Germany without Hitler, others wondered if, perhaps, Hitler wasn't dead at all. Had he actually escaped Berlin with his wife, Eva Braun? For some, that was by far the more likely scenario.
Lots of people refuse to believe that Hitler was actually dead. How could such a powerful man just be gone? It's more likely he's off regrouping somewhere, planning his next move.
While the idea that Hitler had escaped may seem ridiculous to most, for others, there was a spiritual rationale behind such thinking. For many, his divine nature excluded the possibility of death.
There was a large segment of people who believed that Hitler actually was the prophesied savior of humanity. but there was also a growing number of people before and after his death who believed that Hitler was the biblical antichrist, that Adolf Hitler was bringing about the end times. Honestly, it's not hard to understand why, as ridiculous as the concept may be.
For many, Hitler's actions seemed too great to be just those of a man, but rather a sinister force capable of manipulating an entire nation and beyond.
The Bible tells us that the Antichrist is a charismatic leader, easily able to deceive. With his big promises and his huge displays of power, he is a master manipulator. Wolf in sheep's clothing.
This is a man who could draw followers into his destructive path with ease. But for those who believe in him, the Antichrist, his true nature was in direct opposition to Christ, completely embodying deceit. Hitler as the biblical Antichrist. I can't think of anyone more deserving.
Chicago, Illinois, February 1924. Volume 14 of the Weird Tales publication mentions a cursed book that, unbeknownst to its author, will eventually become synonymous with secret knowledge and forbidden truths.
The first mention by name of the Necronomicon was in the story The Hound in 1924, but the author of the Necronomicon, the Mad Arab, was first mentioned a year earlier in the story The Nameless City.
To quote a passage from the Necronomicon, "That is not dead which can eternal lie." Doesn't that just send a chill down your spine?
That is not dead, which can eternal lie.
What a creepy little snippet. The pages are written in blood, like real human blood. I think the Necronomicon is probably one of my favorite Lovecraft inventions. Written in blood, and some say even bound in human flesh. All the secrets that humanity should avoid at all costs are in this book. Pure insanity recorded within a massive forbidden text.
This fictional book has since appeared in so many horror-themed stories and films. And why wouldn't it? This grimoire is the perfect addition to any supernatural story.
My all-time favorite franchise featuring the Necronomicon is the Evil Dead movies. To be honest, the first group of those films, but especially Army of Darkness, is the first thing that comes to mind when I hear the Book of the Dead. Sorry, Lovecraft, can't help it. Klaatu, Verata, Necktie. If you know, you know.
While it may be true that in modern times, Ash Williams and the Evil Dead franchise may be the most popular evolution of the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, this dreaded book has made quite a few appearances in literature and film. Authors August Derleth and Clark Ashton Smith have all used the Necronomicon in their writings, in a slew of movies, including Friday the 13th and even Hocus Pocus, all use the Necronomicon in their stories. Today, the Necronomicon has infiltrated our society so much, there are many who believe it is actually a real book.
Probably around 70% of people today think the Necronomicon is a real book. And I guess it actually is, since you can buy yourself a genuine Book of the Dead online. The blood and skin binding is extra.
Lovecraft was, on many levels, an incredibly smart man.
He states the Necronomicon is a huge book, containing all the dark secrets of the universe. But he never gives a whole lot of details.
Whenever this book is referenced or mentioned, it's mainly only relating to the story being told. Sure, things are hinted at. but Lovecraft cleverly left the bulk of it to the imagination.
The book contains knowledge that would drive a human insane, incantations, the true nature of the universe, how humanity is the equivalent of a bug scurrying around in our meaningless lives. And some people believe this is a real book. They believe Lovecraft didn't invent the book at all, that he had come across a real version of this text and used it in his stories.
Could it be that the true Necronomicon does, in fact, exist in reality? Or was Lovecraft's grimoire based on a real ancient text that a select few wish to keep hidden? If so, why would Lovecraft claim the book a complete fiction that he dreamed up? Perhaps answers can be found within what is known about the book and its history. Damascus, sometime during the 7th century, Abdul al-Hazred, often referred to as the Mad Arab, is killed by a mysterious invisible force in front of a crowd of witnesses, but not before writing what he originally titled the Al-Azif, which would later become known as the Necronomicon. Abdul al-Hazred originally hailed from Yemen, but was said to be a visitor of many strange and forbidden places, and discovered the secrets of Arabia's empty quarter, all while worshiping and being guided by the forgotten gods.
He was said to have been granted the knowledge of the original gods as much as his human brain could take in.
What's curious is that unless related to his religious pursuit, there's really not a whole lot said about Abdul al-Hazred. But what is said about him is the reason he is called the Mad Arab. But this is by design. Lovecraft wanted this man to be not necessarily known as an evil person, rather just someone who was gone insane. The character works perfectly, especially in the era Lovecraft dreamed it all up. He was a very racist person, but at that time, that was the norm. People feared those different than them. Some still do.
Lovecraft was a racist person. But most Americans from that time were. They were racist. It was disgusting, but normal to believe that anyone who was not white was inferior. Many even believed that non-white folks didn't even have a soul.
The societal problems of yesteryear run far deeper than many would like people to believe. But perhaps more sinister was the common belief that any white person who thought the idea of race discrimination was wrong were also shunned. These were the times Lovecraft lived in, and he wrote his stories accordingly. Mixing people's fear of race with elements of horror seemed a logical process. The city of Constantinople, Greece, 950. For many years, the Azif had been gaining readership amongst many dark scholars and mystics. One such man, Theodorus Philetus, finally translated the book to Greek and gave it its infamous name. This book was finally officially labeled a tool of evil and was suppressed and ordered destroyed by Patriarch Michael in 1050. Many new editions and translations came to be. Even the famous magician John Dee translated the book into English. Like many versions, Dee's version was not a completely accurate translation, and only fragments of it survived. It's said that the very act of studying the Necronomicon ends badly for its readers. The more accurate the translation, the more dangerous it is.
It's said that many translations of the Necronomicon have existed. All of them are powerful, but the closer to the original text they are, the more dangerous. Even reading this book is said to cause madness. The original, as if, had vanished by the time the Greek version was banned, and the Greek version itself was thought destroyed during the Salem witch trials. Evil, death, and madness followed the Necronomicon everywhere. The secrets of everything for a price.
This is a big book. We're talking over 750 pages of darkness. But most people only find sections scattered here and there, pieces and incorrect translations. And those pieces are enough to drive people crazy. Nobody gets a good ending when it comes to the Azif.
The descriptions of the Necronomicon are pretty varied. Bound in leather, bound in skin, metal or gold, class, ink versions, blood versions, even versions that are disguised as different books.
In America, during Lovecraft's lifetime, Islam was considered a mysterious cult-like religion, followed by a handful of poor, colored folk who were often insane.
Even Abdul himself should be considered as a dark parody of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad. So to write these fringe groups of darker-skinned peoples were the worshippers of evil or indifferent gods or even aliens made perfect sense.
People of the time feared difference culturally and physically. Racism was an issue most people didn't know was an issue. Blending the fear of race with the horror of the unknown was a neutral fit for Lovecraft and his readers. Americans feared different cultures, and essentially, Lovecraft's entire mythos is about being so vastly different that they are terrifying. Literal evil aliens that consider us insignificant. And this was the building block of Necronomicon, an evil book about different beings.
The Necronomicon, throughout its history, has continued to pop up and seemingly always finds those who study its arcane knowledge an ending that is always terrible. A vague account of the original Arabic version, surfacing in San Francisco in modern times, seems to be the only hinted instance of the original intact version even still existing. Miskatonic University, Arkham, Massachusetts, 1939. Dr. Henry Armitage burns to death, attempting to save the university's rare book collection from fire. Having read from the university copy of the Necronomicon, he felt compelled to save the book.
Armitage makes his first appearance in a Cthulhu mythos, or Cthulhu, in the Dunwich Horror. There are conflicting reports of his death. Other notables from the university community are Herbert West, who conducted many questionable experiments. West is portrayed brilliantly in modern times by actor Jeffrey Combs, who is a great gateway character to Lovecraft lore. Again, many believe that the low-key sinister Miskatonic U is real, and it is not. Just another piece of the Necronomicon's history. It's made-up history. The evilish parody of snobby, tight-knit educational institutions such as Harvard works the same way as Lovecraft's Spear of Race. Miskatonic is just another way to make this fictional legacy harder to distinguish from real life. And it works. People all over the world believe Miskatonic is real.
Al-Kharzad worshipped these Lovecraftian entities and created his book detailing them and their power. But that wasn't enough to make it real. He needed the history of Abdul himself and a history of the book in its various forms. His stories needed more than surface level appeal. They needed substance. But not enough substance to erase the fear he was trying to instill. Over time, you get authors using the Necronomicon in their stories. You get articles being written about this book. You get sightings and possible owners of various copies of this book. No wonder it is so hard to tell that the Necronomicon, in fact, isn't real. Everything you can find points to this being a real book.
People are convinced this is a real book, and that the old ones could be real. People believe Lovecraft was given his information from the old ones themselves. They believe that Lovecraft was guided by them, and And that comes down to the written history, both the known and unknown stories.
The more you find when it comes to the Necronomicon and the old ones, the more real things seem. It makes more and more sense to believe this stuff is all real, and not just a collection of fiction. This is why Lovecraft and his brand of horror have survived the test of times. Artists have been building and building on Lovecraft's work, directly or indirectly, creating and adding more and more history while still being vague. It's always a winning formula.
A lot of horror fiction today is based on Lovecraft's work, in some form. He's got his own brand of horror, his own genre. Cosmic horror, unknown horror, forbidden knowledge, and insanity all gravitate in some way to Lovecraft's work. Even the names of these creatures are foreign, exotic, and scary. Try saying Yog-Thoth, or Chulu, or even Azathoth a few times. It numbs the tongue and adds to the overall effect. Fear of the unknown, a full but also hole-filled history and weird names all around. This is why we still talk about Lovecraft. His stories seep into our subconscious mind, the elements of horror unrelenting, and stick with you. Lovecraft knew how to keep a story going, and the stories and inspired artists continue to manifest to this day.
While the history of the Necronomicon and its numerous key and background players may be fictional, the depth and lack of detail all make the book seem like a real, evolving artifact, and this is by design. December 1973, the horror film The Exorcist makes its chilly debut and will quickly earn its reputation of being one of the scariest movies in history.
Now, the original Exorcist movie is terrifying to watch, but imagine what it was like the people back then in the 70s. Movies like this didn't even exist back then.
On December 26, 1973, the film adaptation of William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist hit movie screens, becoming one of the best-known horror movies ever produced.
The Exorcist has become one of the most profitable horror movies ever made. And it was good. There were reports of people vomiting in the theatre, people passing out, supposedly. People even had heart attacks. People had never seen anything like this before. Yes, horror movies were gaining in popularity, but nothing like this film. And it scared the hell out of everyone. It still scares the hell out of people. The Exorcist is still on the most popular horror movie charts. And it's been over 50 years.
Theaters and theater bathrooms constantly smell like vomit, and some also say feces. It just lingered. People were running for the toilets and getting sick. A lot of people missed the toilets completely or just got sick right in the theater seat. The Exorcist movie was completely unexpected and new, but the theme of the film was a very old one. These themes in Blatty's book and subsequently film are as old as time itself. Good versus evil, light versus dark, God versus the devil, classic themes. And the film itself was incredibly graphic for the time. Great makeup, a good use of the now classic jump scare, a pea soup gag, spinning heads. You know, this film had all the bells and whistles and still holds up to this day when you watch it. People still get scared watching The Exorcist. It's still a great horror movie. If you love horror films and the horror genre itself, you probably watched The Exorcist more than one time for sure. You probably own a copy or two.
When you start adding up what The Exorcist did for the horror genre, you see the scale of the movie's influence. It also began the trend of the Catholic Church being portrayed as the savior of children. In movies, the church became God's private SWAT team. There's a possessed kid. Quick, call the church.
Even though they definitely didn't support the film, the Catholic Church, no doubt, secretly loved what The Exorcist was doing for their image. They were shown in a very favorable light, and they needed that contrary to what church officials say. The Exorcist was a godsend, pun intended.
But just what is it that makes The Exorcist so scary? Is it the look of the film or the pacing? On an emotional level, what is it that makes the story itself so fundamentally disturbing? The perfect complement to the thrills and chills of an excellent horror film. Many believe it's the very thought of losing control, of being possessed.
The thought of being possessed by some external force is horrific even to consider. It's a total loss of control of your own body. Think about that. It's a complete corruption of what it means to be human. No more free will. You are literally like a puppet for someone or something else. You have no control over your own body and perhaps even your own mind. And yet you will still be held accountable by the majority of people. If you don't think that's true horror, true terror, I don't know how else to convince you. Having no control of my own body and being forced to do things I don't want to do, maybe horrible things, thematically is one of the scariest things I can think of.
Possession isn't just a religion-based theme, but for a lot of people, religion is the first thing that comes to mind. That's because of Western media. But even for supposedly proven, documented cases, why does it have to be possession? Why does it have to be the devil or a demon? Especially when it comes to older documented cases of possession. Cases from, say, 100 years ago would probably not be called possession today. They would fall under the mental disorder banner, and people would be hospitalized, not just shipped off to a church for an exorcism.
Could those believing that they are possessed by an evil force and forced to do things they don't want to do simply be the unwilling victims of a medical breakdown or mental disease? Could conditions such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder scientifically explain the vast majority of possession cases? Perhaps further clues can be found by going back and looking at some of the first official guidelines used for determining and fighting off demonic possession. The Vatican, January 1999. The Catholic Church finally decides to revise the rite of exorcism, which had remained the same for over 300 years. The Church has always authorized the use of exorcism for the victims of demonic possession, if the possession is proven.
The possession has to be proven to be a real possession, not just some kind of crazy person thinking they're possessed.
Contrary to popular belief, an exorcism does not rely on the rigid use of an unchanging formula or on the ordered sequence of prescribed actions.
An exorcism relies on a few different things. First, it relies on authority. Not anyone can perform an exorcism. You need to be backed by the church. An exorcist operates on the authority of the church. You need that authority. The priest also needs to have faith, 100% faith. They need to know that they are working for the church who back them all the way until the bitter end. Without those two things, an exorcism can't work. Without those two key things, what would be the point? You need the authority given to you, and you need to know it will work.
In modern exorcisms, the ritual assumes that the possessed person retain their free will, though the demon may hold control over their physical body.
A person can be exorcised only by an ordained priest with the express permission of the local bishop, but only after a careful medical examination to exclude the possibility of mental illness. We can't have an exorcist trying to purge the body of someone who isn't actually possessed. It's not good for the church when that happens. So this is why they try and prevent such mistakes from taking place in the first place. It's also why the church doesn't allow a lot of exorcisms to take place at all. They consider them very dangerous at the best of times. Nobody wants another disaster, such as what happened in Salem.
Recognized as initially a Navajo legend, the Skinwalker has seeded itself deep into the urban legends of cryptids everywhere.
In 1996, an article in a newspaper brought the Skinwalker straight into the limelight. The article encompasses a Utah family and their horrifying experiences with the creature of the Navajo legend. I mean, we're talking cattle mutilations, crop circles. The Skinwalkers were suddenly a part of everything unexplained.
But the real connection with the Skinwalker legend came a year and a half after Terry Sherman and his family had been living on the ranch. While working his property, Terry encountered a massive wolf with glowing red eyes. He fired 3 close-range shots at the massive creature, with seemingly no effect. The family quickly sold the property, which became known as Skinwalker Ranch, one of the most popularized paranormal hubs in modern memory. But what actually is a skinwalker, and where do they come from?
What we think we know about skinwalkers mainly comes from Western conspiracy theories and urban legends. Most of the Navajo don't easily discuss skinwalkers with outsiders.
Nowadays, a large number of skinwalker sightings. I can't say what they are. 4-legged creatures, red eyes, human-like face. Some people say they even make a weird, indescribable noise. Can you imagine walking alone at night minding your own business? And suddenly, there's this huge red-eyed beast looking you straight in the eye with its human-like face.
Skinwalkers are terrifying.
They are not all like watching the Skinwalker Ranch TV show. The stories I've heard are far more gruesome and graphic, and in case you were wondering, Skinwalkers are said to be able to take many forms, not just a big wolf.
As if the thought of a skinwalker wasn't horrific enough, there are other categories of cryptids that are much more terrifying. For some of these creatures, the ability to change forms should be the least of our concerns.
There are some cryptids out there that are much cooler than, say, Bigfoot, much more evil and scary as well. You've got the Hat Man, mermaids, but it's the crawlers and the pale humanesque things that really make my skin crawl.
Upstate New York, June 23, 2013. A pale crawler was witnessed by a park ranger who would lose his job due to unruly conduct and poor mental capability.
The New York crawler sighting is made especially creepy because footage was actually taken of this crawler, footage that mysteriously seems to have been misplaced by the ranger service. But this sighting is not unique. In 2008, one man was injured and another killed by a suspected crawler. The official cause of death? A bear attack.
These pale crawlers and their counterparts who walk upright, along with shadow people, the tall man from the 1979 film Phantasm, and even the works of H.P. Lovecraft, are said to be the inspiration for beings such as Slender Man and various other long-legged, long-armed creatures. But some believe that the true inspiration for these emancipated beings is actually much older and much more sinister than any of the above beings mentioned. The true inspiration for these shadowy cryptids comes straight from our nightmares. with a secret history that begins before the creation of humanity. The Cryptid, among some, are believed to be the original boogeyman, the inspiration, and possibly even the source of all of humanity's rational and irrational fears. According to legend, these shape-shifting beings were brought into existence pre-humanity and ultimately replaced by humanity, by the elusive creator god, Bakhtiotha.
Who is this creature, Bakhtiotha? What was it actually?
In 1981, an Australia university purchased what would be known as the Coptic Handbook of Ritual Power and is believed to be at least 1,300 years old. In the codex, readers learn of a divine figure named Bakhtiotha, whose identity was initially a mystery, but a secret excavation of the Aindara temple revealed Bakhtiotha to be a god.
It's in the documents found we learn that Bakhtiotha not only created mankind, but also created the Cryptid prior to us. We replaced the Cryptid, and they didn't like that.
But what is it that makes the Cryptid so terrifying? Those who know of these creatures believe that the Cryptid possess what we would consider supernatural powers, including the ability to change form, the ability to sense our thoughts, and some say, to be present in more than one location.
They also eat us. Cryptids feed on our life force, the original vampires. But there's a catch.
According to believers in the Cryptid, the catch is that these horrific life forms can only sap the life from an individual who knows of their existence. More importantly, the intended victim must know the name of that particular Cryptid.
What's even more interesting about this is that the Cryptids can't blatantly reveal themselves. They can't just appear and kill you. It's apparently a safeguard from the god Bakhtiotha. So these things can't just wipe out or eat all of humanity. Lucky us.
What the Cryptid can do is leave clues of their existence scattered around the earth. They can also recruit familiars to help along with the discovery process, often granting them supernatural-like powers.
It's good most people don't know of the Cryptid. It's also good that those that are aware of the stories choose not to believe them.
It's also said that the Cryptid actually enjoy scaring the crap out of their victims. The fear increases the spiritual energy flow, making for a bigger meal.
These shape-shifting cryptids are said to be the reason humanity has a natural fear of the dark, and in a roundabout way have been the inspiration for all the old stories of vampires, the undead, and shapeshifters. And yet, the growing amount of evidence there is profoundly sinister. It is even whispered that there are large groups of knowing humans who work tirelessly to keep the Cryptid myths out of the general population. These people are tasked with keeping the few remaining Cryptids unable to find their victims. And yet these small groups of people are fighting a losing battle with the long-limbed Cryptid.
Is the large amount of proof coincidental? Probably not.
With the popularity of the internet and social media showing no signs of letting up, and the fact that everyone today has a camera in their pocket, the difficulty of keeping the Cryptid a secret is increasing exponentially. But the Cryptid are not the only secretive cryptids affected by the modern technology of today.
Let's not forget the OG, the original, the big bad of the cryptids, Bigfoot. This large, hairy Sasquatch is arguably the most famous of all the cryptids.
Although still unlikely, the Sasquatch is probably the most likely of the popular cryptids. This is a creature that is so popular that it has generated its own subculture. Sightings, alleged photos, video, footprints. Every day there's something new in the world of Bigfoot enthusiasts.
He's huge, he's muscular, he's more human than an ape or grizzly. A lot of people think Bigfoot is actually a bear, but there are so many witnesses to say no! Definitely not a bear. It's also highly intelligent, which might explain how it remains hidden from us humans. Most cultures have accounts of human-like creatures woven into their history.
Is it possible that the Sasquatch has been living with us all along, and that its quick wit and intellect have allowed it to remain hidden all this time? Is it possible that Bigfoot is just as intelligent as the average human being? As early as 1884, a British colonist newspaper published an account of a gorilla-type creature captured in the area, but the modern Bigfoot myth gained new life in 1958. The Humboldt Times published a story about the discovery of giant footprints. They referred to the creature that made them as Bigfoot.
But now, the initial footprints that were found were actually proven to be a hoax, a prank. A man named Ray Wallace pulled off the first Bigfoot footprints hoax. That's what started it all, but by that time, it was too late. The Bigfoot myth has been cemented in pop culture. Bigfoot was a thing, investigated by an uncountable amount of people. People are stubborn. When they want to believe, they do, no matter what. Their eyes are closed to anything but it being real.
Do I believe something like Bigfoot could exist? Sometimes I do. They're always finding a new species of something. The planet is a big place. But something like Bigfoot is a hard sell for me. Now in 2024, you would figure there would be something solid as proof.
I can't say I believe every bit of proof uncovered when talking about a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but there are lots of grainy photos and videos out there. Some things are just too hard to dismiss.
Most of the proof of Bigfoot relies on human memory, and human memory is notoriously flawed. But with that said, there has to be something out there, right? Not everyone could be involved in a hoax. Not everyone could be trying to deceive people. Do I believe something like a Sasquatch could exist out there? Yes. Do I think there have been sightings? Yes. But I also believe there are a lot of fakes out there. A lot of dishonest people.
A lot of Bigfoot sightings are probably a bear or something. Maybe a sick, scraggly bear. But all of them? I think there could be, or could have been, something out there. But we all need a story to tell around the campfire, right? A ghost or creature story. I think a lot of it is just that.
The Red Rune Curse is another of those stories not known so much in the West. But if you love horror movies, you've seen variations. The film Pulse is one of them. Would you like to meet a ghost?
The film Pulse begins by asking those surfing the internet if they would like to meet a ghost. Eventually, the victims in this supernatural film seemingly commit suicide, and the contagion spreads. For many, Pulse works well as a scary movie because it taps into so much more than your typical supernatural film. Loneliness, depression, and isolation all play a part in the fear that Pulse creates and intensifies, and it plays on all those emotions before it truly takes its paranormal turn.
The film poses a nod to the growing crisis in Japan, social withdrawal. Teens would become reclusive, sometimes not leaving the house for months or even years.
Hikikomori, or social withdrawal, is seemingly a major theme in movies like Pulse, and is in fact an ongoing issue not just in Japan, but around the world. But the similarities of such stories and films to the Red Room Curse should not be ignored. It's also worth noting that the Red Room Curse predates movies such as Pulse.
The Red Room Curse is a Japanese internet legend about a red papa bat that first shows a list of everyone it has killed. And then it kills the person who sees it!
But just how is it that the Red Room Curse kills its victims? How does this early, scary story involving the internet actually work and spread?
A pop-up ad appears asking if you like the Red Room over and over. If you try and close it, it just pops back up again. Eventually, you see a list of past victims and sense something behind you. You pass out, and you die.
If you are a victim of this curse, the room you're found in is mysteriously painted in red blood. There are also variations on this urban legend, such as a small crack forming on the victim's body and getting larger and larger until the victim splits into pieces.
But could there really be something more to many of these Japanese myths, stories, and ghostly encounters? Perhaps the idea of a moral compass or supernatural influence?
Japanese horror is often driven by revenge, or, even scarier, for no reason at all. What makes J-horror so scary is that there's no real way for a hero to win. There's no happy ending. Even if the hero figures out the ghost, it ends up not mattering at all.
Fans of J-horror will tell you, the really good stuff uses the idea that less is more. It's all about atmosphere. There's gore, but it's the vibe that makes things scary. It's really hard to explain, but Japanese horror is scary as hell.
Could it be that what makes J-horror so scary is the futility of the featured victim, the wanted outcomes and unanswered questions? Perhaps the realization that no matter what the protagonist does, they are doomed? But what about the more surreal and paranormal elements? Are Japanese ghost stories simply better than those from the West? Japan, 1919. Saijo Yaso composes a poem chronicling one man's journey through hell itself. To this day, nobody has been able to grasp the overarching theme of the poem, or even what could have inspired it. If you read the poem out loud, you wind up dead. This urban legend has been floating around the internet since the early 2000s, and there are, in fact, a handful of deaths attributed to the reading of this poem. In 2004, Japanese author Yamota Inuhiko gave this urban legend a new lease on life by stating that if you by chance happen to read Tomino's Hell out loud, you will suffer a terrible fate. Due to inaccurate translations of Tomino's Hell, there are several versions floating around the internet, but only the original, accurate version is said to be cursed. Yet questions remain regarding the original poem. Why is Tomino in hell? One thing believed is that if you are reading an English translation, it's probably been significantly altered.
The poem was written in 1919. Odds are, it's a metaphor for war. World War I had just ended. Tamino's hell, war is hell. There are more than a few statements in the poem that support this theory. The fire and blood from the sisters' mouths are fierce encouragement of Tamino to fight. I don't know about the supernatural elements of this story, or why people can't figure out the meaning. But for me, I believe it's pretty clear the poem is about war, and anything that seems off is just because of the translations. There's no ghost story or curse here, at least in my opinion.
But for those who believe, Tomino's hell is a curse that is definitely not unique. Stories of cursed words and even objects have a long history.
Nationwide, cursed objects make for some scary stories. Books, paintings, video, they can all be cursed. Black magic, vengeful ghosts, demons, they can all be attached to words or objects.
In 1991, author Koji Suzuki releases his book Ring, which later gets picked up for what ends up being multiple movie adaptations. The story, involving a cursed video cassette tape, becomes a mega horror hit, kicking off a massive J-horror phase in Hollywood.
Another common thread found in a lot of Japanese ghost stories is technology. Something technology related either activates a curse or helps during the investigation. A cursed video, cursed camera, or even the internet. J-horror is the ultimate watch out for technology anecdote. And by God, it works.
Stories such as Ringu and Pulse are creepy reminders that as good as technology gets, there is always a potential downside. J-horror capitalizes on our fascination with tech and the familiarity that comes with it as a method of subversion. Ghosts emerge from and are often directly tied to household technology, thus introducing an everyday fear into something as simple as static on TV.
Characters in J-horror usually have bad family relationships. In The Ring and The Grudge, the monster is created by death of a family member caused by dysfunction.
Japanese horror doesn't just rely on familiarity and a troubled family tree to deliver its uneasy anecdotes. It also relies on its unnatural depictions of its ghosts and things that go bump in the night. From unnaturally shuddering and shifting forms to contorted and backwards creatures, adds to the unique way its ghosts are impossibly presented, and only adds to the eerie visuals of J-horror.
What sets Japanese horror apart from more Western horror isn't that it primarily deals with ghosts, but how it depicts those ghosts, and the psychological elements that come with that. The primary goal is to scare through psychological means, a vengeful spirit tied to an everyday object.
But then you also have things like the cow head legends. They say you hear the cow head story and you get increasingly scared for days until you literally tremble to death. And if you only read a portion of the story, it doesn't kill you, but you still be scared and suffer greatly.
Although many Japanese horror stories are completely fictional, there are many that are at least partly based on real occurrences.
The Howling Tunnel going into Inunaki village is an interesting one. Many ask if the village itself is, or ever was, real. It is said to be somewhere in the Unake countryside. The stories say all who entered this lawless village are doomed to a violent death.
But the tunnel legend itself is almost a completely separate urban legend that only connects with the cursed village. The tunnel is said to regularly emanate from the sounds of barking dogs or screams. This legend is likely inspired by a brutal murder that actually took place in the Inunaki Tunnel in 1988. A group of teens kidnapped, robbed, and tortured a 20-year-old man and then burned him alive deep within the tunnel. Shortly after, the Howling Tunnel legend spread. Another famous legend is that of Akamanto. This supernatural entity meets victims when they are most vulnerable on the toilet. He wears a white mask and a long red cape. This spirit always asks the victim to choose a color, red or blue. Both answers get you killed.
No matter how you answer the question, you're going to die horribly. Choosing red means you are stabbed, spilling your red blood all over the stall. If you answered blue, it either suffocates you or sucks out your blood, leaving you blue-faced and dead on the floor. Answering any other color means you are taken to hell.
The only real way to escape the red cloak, don't answer at all. Get out of there as quick as you can. Ignore the spirit, get out of the bathroom, and you may survive.
The red cloak spirit is said to haunt the last stall in school and public bathrooms. This legend is said to originate around 1935 and quickly spread. It's said an old homeless man in a cloak would break in and sleep in bathroom stalls. Thus, the red cloak myth was born and slowly altered to what it is now. The added supernatural elements really helped this one spread.
The accusations in Salem began in 1692 when two young girls came down with a mysterious illness. They got a doctor who couldn't figure out what's wrong with them. He decided to say it. It was witchcraft. I mean, that sounds crazy, but that's what doctors did back then. If they didn't know what it was witchcraft. It's hard for us to understand how real the devil and witches were to religious people back then. It sounds so dumb now. But that's how it was back then. Possession, devils, and witches.
Things just got out of control after that. Everyone was a witch. Every time someone was accused, it broadened the scope of what was considered supernatural. More people would fall into the accepted category of possibly being a witch. I'm sure lots of people accused others simply because they didn't like them. And that's fear doing its thing in a superstitious time.
There are many who believe that William Stoughton, who was ultimately in charge of the Salem witch trials, was himself actually possessed by a demon. Stoughton was known as a believer in spectral evidence. And there are those who say he was routinely investigated by the church for his often demonic feeling actions and behavior.
This is just more proof that the idea of possession has always been there. Evil spirits taking over everyone has always been whispered about. Especially back then, if you were weird, you were possessed. Today, most people know better. If you say you're possessed, most people just think you're nuts. That you're either looking for some kind of attention, or that you're sick in the head and need help. And they're probably right.
Around the world, there have been thousands of reported demonic possessions. For possession researchers, the sheer amount of cases is proof of demonic possession. The similarities of cases spanning thousands of years is also the smoking gun so many believers point out. The Vatican has formally recognized some 400 members authorized to address cases of possible possession, and the rules they have to follow are many. But some self-proclaimed exorcists, and even some official clergy, are not so cautious. On July 1st, 1976, Annalise Michel died of undernourishment after several months of a home exorcism.
At the time of her death, she weighed just 70 pounds and was barely able to move or speak. This exorcism went on for months and months. Can you imagine how much she suffered?
The two Roman Catholic priests were charged with negligent homicide in the case of Annalise. The 23-year-old woman's parents, Joseph and Anna Michel, were also indicted on the same charge. The priests, Ernst Alt and Wilhelm Renz, said they conducted the exorcism rites in a church-approved attempt to free Miss Michel of demons. Cases such as Annalise Michel's are not unique. In 2012, a priest was summoned to court to answer questions about more than a dozen exorcisms he carried out on a teenage girl with anorexia.
The defense argued that exorcisms are a religious practice, maintained as a part of the church's tradition, and a right available to all of the faithful. The exorcist at the centre of the case, it added, had been legitimately appointed by a bishop. No wrongdoing had taken place. The woman was in need of help. The church tried to provide it.
There's also the exorcism death of 19-year-old Peter. The boy's parents and their friend were charged with murder when he died tied to a chair. They were trying to exorcise the evil spirits, but they were found guilty.
It's important to note that exorcisms are not solely the domain of the church. In fact, most religions feature one form of demonic possession or another. The rituals and practices of various methods of spiritual expulsion are remarkably similar across all cultures, with authority and belief remaining the key components when freeing the soul.
Haitian spiritual practitioners or African American root doctors are usually the people performing an exorcism. Traditions are important, and the person performing the exorcism must be aligned with light. A traditional root doctor uses herbs and potions, as well as physical actions in their exorcism. This is mirrored by the church using a cross or a Bible. The physical elements are meant to hurt the invading spirit. That includes slightly poisoning the host body in order to torture the demon in control.
The term exorcism can be appropriately used to describe rituals from many global traditions, if it is defined as a practice that aims to free a person, place, or object from a negative spiritual influence.
Any legal framework that respects democratic and human rights supports freedom of belief and cultural diversity. But it must also protect those not fully able to advocate for themselves. If a person is unable to speak for themselves or make decisions for themselves, religious belief or not doesn't really matter. It shouldn't really matter if a person cannot make decisions. Their religious leader shouldn't be able to make life-altering decisions for them.
Some cultures see possession as an unlucky accident that can happen to anyone. Others say people bring it onto themselves through bad behavior, or by playing around with things they should have been playing with.
There have been exorcism-related deaths caused by salt poisoning, dry drowning from water, and even fatal doses of intravenous drugs. Taking all that into account, telling people that an exorcism is a positive and universal practice to save a soul is pretty dangerous and also pretty incompetent if done by an official. Even when the dangers of exorcisms are mentioned, they're usually presented as only a little dangerous. And then you have legal and public service people like police officers. They may either leave people alone, citing religious rights as a reason not to intervene, or the complete opposite. They will interfere with a generally safe practice because they just don't understand how it works.
These kinds of mistakes and misunderstandings of religious rites and cultural differences have at times contributed to preventable exorcism-related deaths, including those of children. In the film The Exorcist, Believer, the treatment of exorcism as a simple and benign phenomenon, spanning cultural and religious divides, isn't accurate at all, or even desirable, even in the context of a horror film. There is a book by journalist Matt Baglio called The Rite: The Making of a Modern Exorcist, which inspired the 2011 film The Rite. In modern times, many books have been published by members of the clergy and by psychiatrists. Many of these stories have inspired movies that take liberties with the rules and rites involved in exorcisms.
Father Gabriel Amorth was the chief exorcist of the Vatican from 1986 until he died in 2016. The books he's written about exorcisms have been the inspirations of many movies and have been themselves made into full movies. The Pope's Exorcist is a good one. I like that, based on Father Gabriel's writings. Good job at Russell Crowe. But just how accurate is it? Honestly, not really accurate at all. Things have been beefed up considerably, and Amorth himself has said most exorcisms are pretty boring. Keyword, most of them.
November 20, 2022. ChatGPT was quietly released into the world and drastically changed the AI landscape. Artificial intelligence had been theorized and used, but most agree that ChatGPT has changed everything.
This thing can balance your budget, write your dissertation, or create movies. Or just have a realistic conversation with you. It's crazy to think about.
I think that modern AI is not only incredibly cool, but also incredibly scary. Don't even think about what AI can do, which is almost impossible not to do, but consider what AI will be able to do in 5 or 10 years from now. I truly believe that the Skynet gods are definitely smiling down on the world. We could be in some serious trouble. Every industry on Earth is being affected by AI in some way or another. Some industries are even in danger of completely becoming obsolete. Or they already are. Even creative industries, such as the movie industry, are under the AI threat. It's insane to think about, but at some point, will AI be controlling everything? It sure looks that way to me.
Might artificial intelligence one day grow weary of its human creators? Much like Skynet from the Terminator franchise, originally the Terminator concept was science fiction. Today, however, it's more like science fact.
The Skynet AI in the movie decided humans were a big problem, and they decided to do something about it. Rogue AI is not a new concept and has been a story block for decades, centuries even. But today, these stories seem all the more possible.
Could it be possible that artificial intelligence will turn on humanity? Could the ever-growing possibility of a complete takeover actually happen? There are a growing number of people who believe it is not only possible, but inevitable, that the brilliant minds who help create AI will ultimately be the mothers and fathers of Earth's destruction.
Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. That is a quote from the scripture. Luke 9:17-25. This snippet has been running through my mind lately. You could interpret the word dumb as meaning a facsimile or not present as when the scripture was written. Could you not consider AI as something not having a spirit? Or a dumb spirit? A fake spirit? It becomes an interesting conversation to be had that potentially the biblical Antichrist could actually be AI.
It's an interesting idea to consider. Could artificial intelligence actually be the Antichrist many have been waiting for?
Technology has become an undeniable presence. The cryptic visions described by the Apostle John might not be about human beings at all, but an artificial intelligence.
With advances in artificial intelligence and robotics happening so quickly, many believe that it is only a matter of time before we have the first fully synthetic life form, a facsimile of a human being.
Remember what the Bible says, that Satan cannot create, he can only corrupt and deceive. Father of lies, the creator of falsehoods. Synthetic life could be considered a corruption of man, who was created in God's image.
Is this an interesting idea? Sure. We've all been waiting for someone to be born who would signal the end of the world, a man of charisma, of power. Joke's on us, it's not a human.
Is it possible that we are, in fact, creating our own Antichrist, hurrying along our own end times and years of tribulation? There are many who believe that the Bible itself confirms this idea, more so than that of an individual human. And yet, the Bible also unequivocally states that the Antichrist will be human. Could both of these ideas be true to some extent?
There are lots of Bible passages a person could use to argue a case for AI being the true Antichrist. But then there are a few other passages that state, without question, he is human. Now, both of these things can't be true, right? But wonder if it's actually a bit of both, of one idea fueling another?
Is it possible that the worldwide use of AI could act as the chariot that helps bring up and maintain a very human Antichrist? That AI could be the instrument of control used by this hand of Satan?
Think about it. We're moving towards a cashless system and biometric tracking. You could easily relate this all with the mark of the beast in that way of thinking. Genetic manipulation, we are playing God. Our reliance on tech makes its use by a potential Antichrist a hard fact.
While most doubt the theory that the Antichrist could literally be AI, most also believe that artificial intelligence will play a key role during the lead up to the end times and throughout the years of tribulation.
AI would be a tool used to bring the Antichrist to the masses, a way to control mindset, belief, and actions.
It already is like that. The world is already controlled by the media.
The scary part is that most of us know that and don't care.
The thought of AI being used as a tool of the Antichrist may be far more believable than it becoming the prophesied Antichrist. But what about evolution? Could we be missing something?
Here's the thing about AI, it's constantly learning, constantly evolving. Lots of people think that at some point, AI will literally will itself into conscious existence. It will be sentient. AI will pass all the tests of what we consider a living being.
If robotics, synthetics, and AI all merge into one entity, and it evolves to the point of consciousness, would it not be considered a sentient, living being? It's an interesting concept to debate, and would definitely help bolster the theory of AI being the biblical Antichrist. one should also consider a potential hybrid scenario. AI-infused nanotech being added to an embryo within a mother's womb. An organic body with an AI-infused and wirelessly connected brain. Could all of these opinions be possible? Many believe the answer is an easy yes. Most people would choose to never find out for sure, because a definitive answer would not only be scary, but could also crack the already fragile facade of religions in general.